They were the all-American couple.
Good-looking family, great kids, lived in a great neighborhood.
She was a beautiful school teacher.
Alicia was the total package. She had beauty and brains.
He was a handsome veteran.
One of those type personalities that seemed like everybody loved.
But just when it seemed they were bound for a life of happiness, a hail of gunfire stopped them dead in their tracks.
Please help me, please help me, please help me. Ma'am? Somebody shot my husband.
The shooting sparked a frantic manhunt.
The murder had so many questions and not a lot of answers.
And would ultimately expose a tawdry tale laced with lies, lust, and revenge served up at point-blank range.
It wasn't all sunshine and candy bars.
So many twists and turns.
I was sitting on the edge of my seat, wondering what's going to happen.
It reminds you of something from a movie.
June 3rd, 2004. It's a quiet summer evening in the upscale Jackson, Mississippi neighborhood of Lakeover.
You're talking about, a middle-class Black professional neighborhood.
But at 11:10 p.m., an alarm is triggered at the home of Brian and Alicia Hughes.
It was loud enough and pronounced enough for me to know that something wasn't right.
When no one keys in the code, the security company calls the Hughes residence.
Somebody shot my husband. He's bleeding. Please, somebody. Okay, ma'am, I'm going to call the police right back. Please, hurry. Okay.
Officers race to the Hughes residence. Guns drawn, they step inside and find a scene of unimaginable horror.
They found Brian Hughes in the front room. He was actually lying face down on the floor.
A vast pool of blood surrounds Brian. His wife, Alicia, is trembling beside him.
Brian, baby, wake up, please.
She was hysterical, crying, screaming, somebody help my husband. I need some help.
Help me, somebody.
I screamed in vain. It was just unbelievable.
Officers attempt to administer first aid, but it's too late.
He was shot 5 times. The lethal shot entered his chest, and that's what killed him.
63, can you start us a couple of
The major
detectives
crimes
on it?
unit is notified, and in a matter of minutes, homicide detectives are there to initiate a sweep of the home. There's no sign of the gunman or the murder weapon, but officers find the couple's 2 young daughters, safe and sound, asleep in their bedroom. It appears the only eyewitness is Brian's wife.
Now, I know you're disturbed, but can you tell me what happened here tonight?
Brian had went out with his brother, and I went to sleep in the room with my daughters, and I heard a pop.
Alicia's statement to the police was that she was sleeping in the bed with her daughters, and then she heard popping sounds.
She heard this pop, pop, pop sound, and she thought it was coming from the air conditioning system in their home.
According to Alicia, that's when the alarm sounded.
She went to turn off the alarm, realized the door was open, closed the door, and as she was walking back, she saw her husband lying in a pool of blood.
Please help me, please help me, please help me.
This was a bad nightmare for Alicia. She lost her husband, kids lost the father.
Brian Lamar Hughes was born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1974. Even as a child, Brian was a natural leader who attracted friends and followers.
Brian was just everybody's friend. You look in the crowd, everybody kind of standing around Brian. That Brian is their boy. He was a very likable person.
In high school, Brian excelled both in the classroom and on the playing field. Also blessed with good looks and personality, he was popular with the girls as well.
Brian was tall, dark, and handsome. Definitely the type of man a woman would find attractive.
But even in high school, Brian was always looking for that one special person.
Hey.
Hey.
That is, until he laid eyes on fellow classmate Alicia Johnson.
So what you up to? It was the end of class, and he was sitting there, and he was just looking at me.
Wanted to come through and tell you how pretty you were.
He was real spontaneous. He liked to do romantic things.
She was in love with him. Two young folks, who began a relationship as high school sweetheart.
Your first love is exciting. It feels like nobody in the world understands or can possibly imagine how you're feeling.
After high school, Brian and Alicia followed each other to nearby Jackson State University. But their newfound freedom and a sea of young co-eds quickly put their love for each other to the test.
They were still figuring out who they were, what they wanted, and Brian still had the desire to play around.
He was just a young man feeling his oats. I think Brian was into a lot of things.
Alicia and Brian ultimately decided to see other people. Shortly after that, Brian dropped out and enlisted in the Air Force.
Brian and Alicia's relationship was rocky in their 20s. It was on again, off again.
While Brian was in the Air Force, Alicia earned a master's degree in education and landed a teaching job at a local elementary school. Even though she dated other men during this time, Alicia still had a soft spot in her heart for Brian.
He was a good guy. He had a way about him where he could make you feel special, without really even trying.
And after 4 years in the Air Force, Brian returned to Jackson.
After the military, he came back home, and he followed in his father's footsteps and started working at Delphi Packard Electric.
What?
What you doing?
I'm washing dishes. What you think?
But it wasn't just the job Brian came home for.
What you want me to do? Start right here?
You better stop.
There were still that young flame that was still going for each other. And they were able to rekindle that fire.
Brian and Alicia's desire for one another had never burned hotter. And this time, their passionate reunion was life-changing.
They were in love. That was her soulmate.
When Brian and Alicia hooked back up together, they were looking to build a life with each other and live that happily ever after together.
In the fall of 1999, almost a decade after they first started dating, Alicia and Brian welcomed the birth of their first child. 8 months later, they married.
So I just wanted to be, a good wife, a good mom, and good at what I did.
With the couple making good money, they bought and renovated a home in the charming middle-class neighborhood of Lakeover.
They're moving into this great neighborhood. It's like, wow, they're doing it right.
The couple had even more to celebrate when Alicia gave birth to another baby girl in 2001.
They have these great kids. You think they're just, building a great life for themselves and just living the American dream.
Which makes the nightmarish scene police encounter inside the Hughes residence all the more tragic.
Everybody was shocked that this thing could even have occurred after these two people.
But who would want to kill Brian Hughes, and why?
Still trying to piece of this.
As investigators dig deeper, a strange theory about the crime emerges. One that would shock everyone who'd ever known this seemingly storybook couple.
It's a true whodunit. And then when the story started to unravel, there was an even bigger mystery there.
High school sweethearts Brian and Alicia Hughes had gone their separate ways, only to reunite after college and reignite their red-hot romance.
Brian and Alicia were definitely a power couple. They seemed like the perfect romantic love story.
But that love story is ripped apart when police respond to a shooting at the Hughes residence and find Brian's body riddled with gunshot wounds.
It seemed like a mystery. No one knew exactly what happened on that night of June the 3rd, 2004.
A stunned Alicia tells police that she'd fallen asleep in her daughter's room, only to awake to the sound of what she thought was a noisy air conditioner. That's when the alarm sounded.
The door's open, the alarm system is going off. She goes into the front room and sees that her husband's been shot and bleeding out everywhere.
It was surreal. It was like an out-of-body experience. You feel so inept.
You just start thinking like, wow, this poor woman, this happens to her husband and with her kids in the house.
Please help me, please help me.
As detectives console Alicia, officers begin processing the scene.
Were there any signs of forced entry?
No, sir. We checked all the doors and windows. If they came in, they had to come in through the front.
Okay, thank you.
But on the front porch, they find evidence that suggests the attack on Brian began near the door.
There were 3 shell casings outside the door.
In the den, police recover 3 more shell casings, which suggest a total of 6 rounds were fired, and all but 1 made contact with their target.
This murder was pretty brutal. Brian was shot multiple times, so whoever shot him definitely wanted him dead.
Just outside the couple's home, detectives noticed something else.
There were skid marks in the street right in front of the residence.
Somebody had a car sitting outside. They went up there and shot him. He got back in the car and sped away.
Between the shell casings, the skid marks, and the home's location in the upscale Lakeover neighborhood, authorities wonder if Brian has been the victim of a deadly robbery.
When I first heard about it, I thought that it was someone from the outside came in and committed the murder. Jackson has more murders than it should have. I thought it could have been a burglary gone bad.
But as they continue to search the residence, detectives realize there's a problem with that theory.
There was no sign of forced entry into the home. They didn't take anything.
As the mystery deepens, news of Brian's murder spreads through Jackson like wildfire.
My mom calls my phone, hysterical, crying. He's dead. Brian is dead. Brian is dead. They shot him and they killed him.
First thing I thought about, the 2 little girls. They don't have a daddy no more. And that made me mad. He was young.
Grieving friends and family soon converge on the Hughes residence. Police try to be sympathetic while preserving their crime scene.
Sir, we're still trying to piece the investigation together. Just hold tight, because we will have some questions for you later on.
The Hughes family was like a prominent family here in Jackson. The police allowed certain folks in the house, especially both relatives of Alicia Hughes and relatives of Brian Hughes, into the house that night.
Her family was there. A lot of people were there. Everybody was upset.
But no one seems more upset than Brian's wife.
Alicia's distraught. She can hardly speak. Understandably so, she's very, very upset.
I didn't want to be there. It was so difficult. It was just unbelievable.
In fact, Alicia is so distraught, she's of little use to detectives.
Listen, she's too upset, man. We're not going to get any information from her today.
Yeah, I agree. Let's cut her loose. We'll talk to her in the morning.
A person in authority made the call to talk to her at a later time.
You got somewhere you can go with the kids?
Yeah.
Come on, we'll get you out.
Alicia packs an overnight bag, gathers her 2 girls, and heads to her mother's house. Meanwhile, detectives question friends and family gathered at the scene.
What's your name, sir?
Willie Hughes. And who are you in relation to the victim?
I was his brother.
Can you tell me where you were tonight?
We just went out to grab a few drinks. We got some fast food, and I dropped him off, and that was the last time I saw him.
They had been out, having a good time. He dropped off his brother that night.
I think maybe somebody followed him home, rang the doorbell, and he let him in.
That may explain the unforced entry.
And the shell casings outside.
Investigators float this theory by Brian's family, but they find it hard to believe Brian would answer the door for anyone at such a late hour.
If you didn't call, and if you just go to the door and knock or ring the doorbell, he would not answer the door.
So if Brian wouldn't answer the door for a stranger, was it possible he knew his attacker? The answer to that question would scandalize all of Jackson, and in the process reveal a dark side to Brian and Alicia's romance that few had ever seen. The fairy tale romance of Brian.
We're talking about just 2 great individuals, loving relationship, great, perfect family. And having gone through this was terrible.
Shell casings collected at the scene suggest Brian was initially shot near the front door, then again in the living room.
They were of the belief that someone An outsider broke in, obviously, because the alarm went off and shot Mr. Hughes from that doorway.
But the lack of forced entry suggests Brian willingly let the shooter into his and Alicia's home. If that was the case, who was this mysterious acquaintance Brian allowed inside? And what sinister desires compelled them to murder him in cold blood? The one person who might help investigators answer that question is Brian's wife, Alicia. But the horror of discovering her husband's dead body has seemingly left Alicia too distraught to be of any use. And a few hours after the murder, detectives allow Alicia and her children to leave the scene and spend the night with some relatives. By the following morning, Alicia is ready to talk.
Good morning, Alicia. I just want to start off by thanking you for coming in this morning. I know you're distraught. I know it's a trying time. But I just wanted to ask you, is there anybody who would want to hurt Brian?
No. Everybody loved him.
Do you think you could walk us through the events of last night again?
Yeah, just put the girls to bed. And so I fell asleep.
Her story never changed, that she heard a loud popping or something.
I thought it was the air conditioning system, so I got up.
She said she went in the front room, and there she said she found her husband dead, lying on the floor.
Then the alarm company called and I answered the phone.
Though Alicia's statement doesn't get investigators any closer to cracking the case, it does seem to dovetail with evidence collected at the scene and allows them to essentially rule her out as a possible suspect. But before they release her, detectives ask Alicia to submit to a gunshot residue test.
It's just standard procedure.
Sure.
After a quick dusting of her hands, she is free to go.
Thank you, ma'am.
They let her go.
We'll see you out.
The detectives did not think that she was a suspect.
So who did have the opportunity and the motive to pull off this brutal attack?
It's one of those situations where, dead men can't talk.
Perhaps, but maybe the dead man's autopsy could.
Brian was shot in several areas. He was shot in the chest area, in the arm, and the thigh area. What was interesting about one of those shots, he was shot near the groin area.
It just makes you wonder what was really going on and what led to that. Was it a crime of passion? Was it rage?
It's an interesting question. Brian is a handsome, charming man who seems to have it all. Is it possible someone murdered him out of jealousy? In an effort to answer that question, investigators interview several of Brian's friends and coworkers.
Fred?
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? Detective Daniels?
Nice to meet you.
This is my partner, Detective Gibson.
In doing so, they unearth a shocking revelation.
Is there anything you can tell us about his lifestyle or shed any information on his life that might help us with this investigation?
I mean, Brian was a good man. He was there for his family, financially. But Brian loved women, and women loved Brian. He never had any trouble meeting them.
Oh, so basically, he was a player.
Absolutely.
Many of his coworkers talked about how it was obvious that he was involved with women that he worked with. It was obvious that there was something intimate or romantic going on.
Brian could meet him anywhere because he knew every bar, every club, and he was friends with everybody. Jackson was his palate.
This is completely shocking that Brian, who lives this picture-perfect life, is having an affair.
Fred Clark Jr., a friend of Brian's, also tells police about a conversation he overheard just 2 weeks before Brian's murder.
Well, there was this one time I went over his house.
When I was walking in his front door, he was in this heated argument with this guy on the phone. The guy was cussing. I could hear the cuss words through the phone. And the dude was like saying, "I'm going to get you."
Show up in my yard if you want to.
And he basically told the person on the phone, F you do what you got to do.
You.
What's this all about, man?
He told me his girlfriend had been paying for his cell phone for about 2 years. And the girlfriend was married.
That was a husband on the phone.
Because
What
they
you gonna
found
do?
out that he did have other lady friends, of course, anyone that would have been associated with them, the ladies as well as their partners, boyfriends or husbands, would be suspects.
Well, that helps us a lot.
Sure.
Fred Clark's statement got investigators wondering. Had the woman's husband threatened to kill Brian if he didn't stop sleeping with his wife? And had Brian signed his own death warrant by daring the man to make good on it?
Brian is a man. I mean, you're not gonna be intimidated by what another man's saying on the phone.
But who is Brian's mistress? And more importantly, who is the jealous husband? According to Brian's colleagues, the woman's name is Sandra Davis. She's married to Martin Davis, one of Brian's acquaintances. When confronted, Martin doesn't deny he'd recently discovered his wife was sleeping with Brian, nor does he deny threatening Brian over the phone in a rage. Investigators are suspicious. They subpoena Brian's phone records to see if he'd been in contact with either of the Davises in the days leading up to the murder.
Investigators discovered that right before Brian's murder, that he was speaking to somebody on the phone.
Brian hung up the phone.
Gotta go.
That was about 10 minutes before he was killed.
Could this phone call be from Martin Davis or his wife? And is it another heated exchange that led to Brian's murder? In a case already dripping with allegations of infidelity and deceit, the answer to that question would prove more scandalous than investigators ever imagined. The brutal slaying of Jackson, Mississippi native Brian Hughes has taken a bizarre turn. In speaking with friends and coworkers, detectives have learned the dream life Brian was living with his beautiful wife Alicia is a mirage, and that Brian was anything but a model husband.
The extramarital affairs and several women on the side, it just cracks the mirror of what you thought this family was like.
But the allegations of Brian's infidelity have allowed investigators to zero in on a possible suspect, a man named Martin Davis. Martin's wife Sandra had been having a torrid affair with Brian.
The husband threatened the next time he interacts with his wife, he was going to hurt Brian.
A search of cell phone records reveals Brian was on the phone with someone just minutes before he was murdered. Investigators suspect that if that phone number traces back to Martin Davis, then they've likely identified Brian's killer. But it turns out the number isn't registered to Martin Davis, but rather to one Robbie Rayford.
Was a possible jealous husband of one of the women that Brian was having an affair with.
But when investigators pay Robbie Rayford a visit, they're shocked by who greets them.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you speak to Robbie Rayford, please?
I'm Robbie Rayford. This Robbie person, whom Brian was speaking to before his murder, was actually a girl and not a guy.
Robbie is devastated to learn Brian has been murdered, and she pulls no punches as to why.
We've been sleeping together for 2 years. Brian and I are in love.
She talked about, how they had had relationships. They had had sex, numerous times.
When was the last time you spoke?
A few days ago.
Yeah, just got home.
She said she heard Brian come in, set the alarm system at the house, turn the TV on.
So I come see you tomorrow. I gotta go.
And then he said, I have to go.
Is that unusual?
No, that's our code for my wife is in the room.
Robbie said that was the code word that, she and Brian used to let her know that Alicia was there.
If that's the case, that means that she was there in the living room and possibly during the time that he was killed.
Investigators are floored. Not only does Robbie Rayford's statement call into question Alicia Hughes' version of events, it vaults Alicia to the top of the list of possible suspects.
Maybe she heard him on the phone. He thought she was asleep. He was talking to his girlfriend. She got her gun. She walked into the living room where she pointed the gun at him.
Lie to me one more time.
Come on.
Shot him again and again and again.
Though it's admittedly hard for investigators to imagine the beautiful Alicia Hughes as a vengeful killer.
It just doesn't make sense that this lady, this petite, frail school teacher, would have killed him.
Although investigators can't help but think back to the intensely personal nature of Brian's injuries.
If Alicia is the shooter in this case, that groin shot was one that may have been personal for her. If you're going to cheat on me, here's one for you.
But neither Brian's mortal wounds nor Robbie Rayford's statement are enough to concretely link Alicia to the murder. And forensic evidence collected at the scene still suggests that whoever shot Brian initiated the attack from just outside the front door.
There were 3 shell casings found outside the door on the doorstep. Somebody would have had to been out front shooting the gun.
Investigators decide to revisit the crime scene to see if there's anything they might have missed.
Just doesn't make sense.
There was no traces of blood from the front door to where he was, where his body was found.
There's no blood splatter on the walls or nothing.
All the blood that was found was directly beneath his body on the floor in the living room. He was shot with a .45 caliber handgun. It's a big, large caliber handgun. He was shot 5 times. Somehow, from the foyer to the living room where his body was found, he didn't bleed one drop.
If he got shot by a .45, we would have had splatter on the floor, on the walls, or something, but all the blood's right here.
Their theory was that someone actually got those shell casings from the inside and actually placed them on the outside.
If that's the case, then the shooting was initiated by someone inside the home.
Alicia?
And she staged the casings outside.
But what about the tire tracks found outside the couple's home? They suggest someone may have quickly fled the scene. In speaking with one of the Hughes neighbors, that fact is also called into question.
The witness that we interviewed never said anything about they heard a car.
We don't know when they were put there. Skid marks can stay on pavement for months and months before they wear off from water and erosion. That's the problem with skid marks.
The affairs, the blood evidence, Robbie Rayford's statement.
2 years.
It appears the circumstantial evidence now points to Alicia Hughes as her husband's killer. But is jealousy a bona fide motive?
Why couldn't she have just divorced him? If he had all these affairs and she was sick of him fooling around, you get a divorce. She was a school teacher. She had a job. The money's coming every month. So why kill him?
But when they pull Brian and Alicia's financial records, investigators find another clue.
There were 2 life insurance policies. One was $250,000, and I believe there was a small one for around $80,000. And that was going to go away once they got the divorce. Now, the way that wouldn't go away is if Brian died and she got the life insurance money.
Suspicion only deepens when investigators contact Brian and Alicia's insurance company. It turns out they had received a phone call from Alicia just weeks after Brian's death.
It's pretty shocking for Alicia to be inquiring about the interest that she would be making on her husband's life insurance policy, considering that her husband had been brutally murdered.
Still, without additional physical evidence, investigators have no way of charging Alicia with any crime. Then, on February 3, 2005, investigators received word from the state crime lab. The results of the gunshot residue test, administered to Alicia almost as an afterthought, have come back positive.
Either you fired a gun, held a gun, or was close to when a gun was fired. Those are the only 3 reasons it would be on the back of your hand.
In addition to the gunshot residue, a deeper background check reveals Alicia had easy access to a gun similar to the murder weapon.
Brian apparently had owned a .45 caliber weapon that could not be found.
Still, one could argue the findings of the gunshot residue test aren't quite a slam dunk.
They only found 1 particle of gunshot residue on the back of her right hand.
But when coupled with the circumstantial evidence, it's enough to charge Alicia Hughes with the murder of her husband. The story is immediate front-page news in Jackson.
It was sensational. It was huge. I mean, you have this picture-perfect couple who were high school sweethearts, the perfect love story that ends in a tragic murder.
I didn't want to believe that she did it. I didn't want to.
But nobody claims to be more shocked by Alicia's arrest than Alicia herself.
You always assume that people are going to believe you. And so I always felt like, surely they can't consider me because, I've told the truth.
There was intense interest in this case. because it had everything. You know, it had the cheating husband. It had the wife accused of shooting her husband.
And as the case heads to trial, it becomes clear that a guilty verdict against this wife and mother turned alleged killer is anything but a done deal. On January 3, 2007, Alicia Hughes is escorted into a Jackson, Mississippi courtroom to stand trial for the first-degree murder of her high school sweetheart turned unfaithful husband, Brian. In their opening arguments, prosecutors come out swinging.
That Alicia Hughes, in fact, murdered her husband, Brian Hughes, in cold blood.
I told him exactly how she did it, how she waited for him to come home, how she walked in, how she confronted him, how he was on the phone with Robbie.
I'm sick of you lying to me!
How she shot him.
Lie to me one more time.
After pumping several shots from a .45 into Brian, Alicia allegedly staged the scene to look like an intrusion.
Their theory was that Alicia Hughes got those shell casings from the inside and actually placed them on the outside.
Prosecutors contend Alicia also feigned grief in order to convince police to let her leave the scene, which allowed her to smuggle the murder weapon out of the house in her overnight bag.
I believe this was all premeditated. She planned it. She waited for Brian to come in that night, and then she killed him. She's got two motives. One, the insurance money, and two, an unfaithful husband. You take your pick.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
To support their claim, the state calls Brian's lover, Robbie Rayford, to the stand.
Ms. Rayford, can you please tell the court the nature of your relationship with Mr. Hughes?
We were lovers.
She's up there in front of the whole world, basically saying, I'm Brian's mistress. And she said she loved him, and her exact words were,
He was my soulmate.
Can you tell us about the events of June 3rd?
I was on the phone with him.
Yeah, just got home.
I heard him go in the house. And he
See you
says,
tomorrow.
I have to go.
Gotta go.
Then I asked him, is she in the room? And he said, yeah.
That's when he was shot.
And for the court, can you tell us who she is?
His wife.
Everything Robbie said fit with the physical evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have to know that the physical evidence is not adequate to convict Alicia Hughes.
Alicia's defense team counters by attacking the physical evidence, namely the GSR test.
She had a speck of gunshot residue powder on her hand.
For someone to have shot a .45 caliber pistol 5 or 6 times, there'd be GSR on her hair, there'd be GSR on her face, on her arms. It wouldn't be one single particle.
They can't provide a weapon.
The defense also points out the lack of a murder weapon, which renders their theory about Alicia smuggling it out in her overnight bag mere conjecture.
If she could have done that good, she doesn't need to be here. She needs to be in Hollywood. You know, she's one of the best actresses ever lived.
On January 8, 2007, 2.5 years after Brian's murder, both sides rest their case.
And you had folks who said they thought Alicia Hughes was guilty. You had a lot of folks on the other side said this sweet teacher couldn't have killed her husband.
2 hours later, the jury returns with its verdict.
The jurors were saying, guilty, guilty, all 12 of them, just over and over again. And I was still trying to grasp, onto that and trying to keep my face straight.
We were in total shock and disbelief. She couldn't believe it.
Alicia Hughes, please stand. Mrs. Hughes, on the charge of murder in the first degree, I am sentencing you to life in prison.
Alicia just stood there like, there's no way.
As she's carted off to the penitentiary, tears flow from both her supporters and Brian's grieving family.
Brian and Alicia had known each other since high school, so these are also two families that had known each other for many years. And to be divided because of a situation like this made it really tough.
But before either side can put this tragedy behind them, They'll be blindsided by an unlikely turn of events that forces everyone to question whether Alicia Hughes was a cold-blooded killer or an innocent woman wrongfully accused.
I was sitting on the edge of my seat, wondering, what's going to happen.
In January of 2007, Alicia Hughes is convicted of murdering her husband and former high school sweetheart, Brian.
The jury found her guilty of killing her husband. Brian Hughes' family, they believe that justice was served.
But immediately following Alicia's conviction, her attorneys file an appeal, arguing prosecutor Stan Alexander unfairly struck jurors in the selection process on the basis of race and gender.
All you heard was Stan was racist. He didn't want black women on the jury. And it's ridiculous. I'm married to a black woman. My mother's a black woman.
Surprisingly, presiding Judge Winston Kidd grants the appeal, ruling that Alicia's right to a fair trial amongst her peers had been violated, in essence, overturning his own verdict.
It was like just instant relief. It was just absolutely an incredible feeling.
On November 5th, 2007, 9 months after her first trial ended, Alicia Hughes walks back into a Mississippi courtroom to stand trial once again for the murder of her husband, this time with a new panel of jurors. And again, the state argues that the evidence still points to just one person.
After we read the entire book, and not just read the cover, you're going to find out the story of Alicia Hughes' life, that she's guilty of murder.
Prosecutors also called Brian's lover, Robbie Rayford, to the stand to help corroborate their version of events.
Well, what did those words mean to you when he was at home?
It meant that his wife was in his presence.
As in the first trial, Robbie Rayford's testimony seems to connect the dots of the state's case, particularly as it relates to the blood evidence.
There's no way possible you get shot at the front door with a 45 5 times and don't bleed until you get back to the living room floor.
But when it's their turn, Alicia's defense team takes a new approach, and this time they're armed with some serious legal firepower.
They brought in a top-notch attorney, Dennis Sweet. He's really a high-profile attorney in this area.
Sweet starts by criticizing investigators and the chaos that permeated their crime scene.
The defense pointed out that numerous folks, individuals were allowed in the house that same night during the shooting, which may have contaminated things.
They didn't secure the scene. The crime scene investigator himself is pretty good. He doesn't lie. His crime scene was not secured. He came in, he's not supposed to secure it, he's supposed to investigate it. So it was like Grand Central Station going through it. He said, yeah.
With so much foot traffic at the crime scene and so many alleged affairs, Sweet asserts it's impossible to determine exactly who killed Brian.
The problems I saw were mainly the infidelity. It came out later on. I feel strongly it's not family. And I think there is some gunman out there who, for whatever reason, whether it's a jilted lover or whether it's some drug dealer that came and killed him. I feel like there's somebody still out there.
After running through the laundry list of jilted lovers and seething spouses who might want Brian dead, the defense turns to another piece of unexplained evidence: the skid marks found outside the home the night of the murder.
They said that skid marks could be there and there was no way to date them.
But Dennis Sweet claims he's found someone who can.
Dennis went and knocked on doors, and he found a neighbor that said, the police never interviewed me. They never come to my house.
On the stand, the Hughes neighbor Dorothea Presley tells the court that on the night of the murder, she awoke to the sound of gunfire.
After you heard the shots, did you hear anything else?
Shortly thereafter, I heard a car skid away.
She heard the squelching of an automobile tire, like someone, leaving real fast after she heard gunshots. This lady had impeccable credibility, and I think that single witness probably provided the boost to the defense case.
On November 16, 2007, the jury once again breaks for deliberation.
I believe everybody was sitting on the edge of their chair wondering, what are they about to tell us? The courtroom was quiet. It seemed like it took forever for the jury to walk in and sit down.
Again, it takes just 2 hours for the jury to return with a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
When that second jury came back not guilty, it just doesn't get any better than that.
I don't even remember hearing all the words that were said after the not guilty. I was so thankful to God and to that jury.
Friends and family of Brian Hughes are devastated by the verdict.
They wonder if there'll ever be justice for Brian Hughes. In their minds and the minds of many who knew him, they think a killer got off.
Whoever pulled that trigger, they gonna get theirs one day. I mean, judgment day coming.
A lot of folks think that Alicia Hughes is a person who got away with murder. And there are those out there who think that someone else killed Brian. What's interesting is that we may never get the answer.
The Trotter Chronicles, From Gold to Grit, a novelization by Gemini. Prologue, The Man in the Sharp Suit. The air in the office was thick with the scent of expensive mahogany and the faint, clinical aroma of high-end air purifiers. Justin, a man whose skin looked like it had been buffed by a professional at a Swiss spa, leaned back in his leather chair. He adjusted his glasses, looking at the two men sitting across from him. One of them, Derek Delboy Trotter, was a man who looked like he belonged in a very different kind of office one, with a calendar of a local garage on the wall and the lingering smell of cigar smoke and hopeful desperation. Del was dressed in what he considered his business best, a suit that shimmered just a bit too much under the fluorescent lights, and enough gold jewelry to make a pirate blush. Next to him sat Rodney, younger, leaner, and perpetually looking like he had just realized he'd left the oven on at home. Rodney was sweating, not the confident sweat of an athlete, but the cold, clammy moisture of a man who knew his brother was about to say something that would embarrass them both for the next century. I've got all the basic details about your business career, Justin began, his voice smooth and devoid of any Peckham grit. But what I'd like to do is to get an insight into the real you, how you started, how you became so successful, but more importantly, your lives and your raison d'etre. Del Boy's eyes lit up. He didn't know what a raison d'etre was, but it sounded French, and in Del's world, French meant class. Oh, no, Del whispered to Rodney, Laboratory Garney. Rodney closed his eyes and prayed for the floor to open. It's not Laboratory Garney. Del, he hissed. He's asking for our reason for being. Exactly what I said. Prove. Del snapped back, before turning to Justin with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo and then charge him for the delivery. Well, Justin, where shall I start? Up to a few years ago, we were just very ordinary people living. Well, very ordinary lives, weren't we, Rodney? And so the story began. A story of a watch found in a garage, a fortune made in an instant, and a fall so spectacular it made the Hindenburg look like a minor fender bender. Chapter 1, The Caribbean Dream. The sun over Barbados didn't just shine, it announced itself. It turned the turquoise water into a sheet of diamonds and the white sand into something so bright it hurt to look at without designer sunglasses, which, of course, the trotters were wearing. Only a few months prior, the trotters had been living in a council flat in Peckham, wondering if the hooky VCers they were selling would last through the first reel of Rambo. Then came the watch, an 18th century Harrison marine chronometer hidden in their garage for decades. It had sold at Sotheby's for £6.5 million. In an instant, Derek Trotter, the man who once sold one-legged turkeys at Christmas, was a multimillionaire. Look at this, Rodney, Dell had said, leaning over the balcony of their private villa. He was holding a glass of something blue with a miniature umbrella in it. Total luxury. This is what we were born for. Mange tout, Rodney, mange tout. Rodney was sitting in a hammock, trying to read a book on sociology, but failing because Cassandra kept applying sun cream to his back. It's a bit much, isn't it, Dell? I mean, 6 months ago we were sharing a bathroom with a leak that Uncle Albert called characterful. Characterful. It was a health hazard. Dell laughed. But look at us now. We've divvied the dosh up. We made sure Uncle Albert got a nice little drink, figuratively speaking, though knowing him. He's probably literally drinking most of it down on the coast with Elsie Partridge. They had been the kings of the island. They donated to charity mostly because Dell liked the gala dinners, and they invested. Oh, how they invested. Dell had met a man in a bar. A visionary, Dell called him. A con artist, Rodney had countered. The man spoke of Central American markets, of vibrant ventures, and emerging economies. He spoke of turning millions into billions. It was a royal mint. Rodney, Dell shouted into the tropical wind. We were making money while we slept. But the Caribbean sun has a way of blinding you to the clouds on the horizon. Chapter 2, The Sound of the Crash. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a phone call and a decline message on a credit card at a 5-star hotel. What do you mean? Insufficient funds. Dell had barked at the hotel manager, his gold rings clacking against the marble countertop. Do you know who I am? I'm Derek Trotter. I've got more money than the Sultan of Brunei's paperboy. The manager was polite but firm. The Central American market hadn't just dipped, it had evaporated. A coup, a currency collapse, and a series of creative accounting errors by their visionary friend had turned the Trotter fortune into a pile of worthless digital ash. Rodney, Dell whispered, his face turning a shade of gray that matched the London fog they had tried so hard to escape. The negotiations. They've collapsed. Collapsed. Rodney felt his stomach drop. Dell, we put everything into that venture. The houses, the stocks, the peacocks. I know, Dell said, his bravado finally cracking. We've even paid for this hotel on a credit card. A credit card which has now been withdrawn. The journey back to the UK was a blur of cramped airplane seats and the crushing realization that the dream was over. They weren't returning to a hero's welcome. They were returning to a financial wilderness. And it wasn't just them. Back in Peckham, the ripples of their failure were turning into waves. Michael Fisher, the landlord of the Nag's Head and a man who had trusted Dell with his life savings, was now behind bars. He had remortgaged the pub to follow the Trotter gold mine, and when it collapsed, he had tried to recoup the losses by embezzling from the brewery. He was a desperate man, and Dell felt the weight of every brick in Mike's prison cell. Chapter 3, The Court of Peckham. The corridors of the courthouse felt like a tomb. Denzel, a man whose nerves were usually held together by habit and hope, was pacing so fast he was nearly burning a hole in the linoleum. Denzel, sit down, Albert's voice echoed. Denzel stopped and looked at the group gathered. There was Trigger, looking as vacant as a Sunday morning in a library. There was Boyke, looking smug despite the circumstances. And there was Sid, the cafe owner, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I can't, Albert, Denzel groaned. I've never been a character witness before. I'm worried. I think Dole's made a terrible mistake. Having us for here, it's like inviting the Manson family to dinner. Don't be so dramatic, Trigger said, staring at a fly on the wall. I'm going to tell them I hear voices. Trigger, you're not the one on trial, Denzel hissed. I know, Trigger replied simply, but I still hear voices. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even grimmer. The Inland Revenue was a beast that didn't care about mange tout or lovely jubbly. They wanted their pound of flesh, and they wanted it in sterling. Dell and Rodney stood before the judge. The properties were gone. The cars were gone. The peacocks had probably been repossessed by a very confused bailiff. Are there any mitigating circumstances? Their lawyer asked. Dell stepped forward, adjusting his tie. Oh, yes, you must remember to tell them that we were slaves to detail, wouldn't you? Rodney, we made certain that we always got our checks off to the Inland Revenue on time. Always, Rodney added, his voice cracking. Fair dues, Dell whispered as the judge looked down at them. They bounced, but they was always on time. The verdict was swift. Bankruptcy. They weren't going to prison, not yet, but they were being stripped of everything. The debt stood at $48,750 for pounds. It was a number that haunted those dreams. It wasn't just money, it was the price of his pride. Chapter 4, The Wrong Gentleman. Amidst the financial ruins, a personal tragedy struck. Uncle Albert, the man who had survived the Battle of the Atlantic only to be nearly killed by those cooking 1,000 times, had passed away. The funeral was a somber affair, or it should have been. The Trotters arrived at the cemetery, faces long and hearts heavy. I feel bad. You know, Dell whispered to Rodney as they walked toward the open grave, leaving him here on his own while we was all off globe-trotting. He wasn't on his own, Dell, Rodney said. He had Elsie. He was happy. They stood by the grave, listening to the vicar speak of a man named Bunny who had served in the RAF. Bunny, Dell frowned. Why did he call him Bunny? Well, that's what they called him in the RAF, didn't they? A stranger next to them whispered, because his surname was Warren. Dell froze. He looked at the headstone. He looked at the grieving widow, who was definitely not Elsie Partridge. He looked at the photo of the deceased man who looked remarkably like Albert, but was missing the signature during the war beard. Rodney, Dell hissed, his eyes wide. Is that a Spitfire on the coffin? Yeah, Rodney whispered back. We're at the wrong funeral. They retreated with the quiet dignity of two men who had just realized they were mourning a complete stranger. It was the perfect metaphor for their lives, showing up with good intentions, only to realize they were in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong dead relative. Chapter 5. New Management. Back at Nelson Mandela House, the flat felt smaller than it used to. The wallpaper was peeling, and the ghost of their millionaire lifestyle lingered in the form of a single, half-empty bottle of expensive cognac. The firm's been liquidated, Rodney said, staring at the kitchen table. Trotter's Independent Traders is no more. It's Capit. No, 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 Dell said, his mind racing. The firm can go on trading. It's just that I've been disqualified from running it. That doesn't mean to say I can't work for it. He looked at Rodney, really looked at him. We need a new managing director, Dell mused. Someone young, someone enthusiastic, someone full of ideas. Rodney looked around the room. Who? The window cleaner. No, Rodney, you. Rodney's jaw dropped. Me? Dell, I can't run a company. I can't even run a bath without getting a headache. Legally, there is nothing to stop you, Dell insisted. You're clean. No bankruptcy, no disqualification. You'd be the boss. Rodney Trotter, managing director. And so, the power dynamic shifted. Within days, the local paper carried a small advertisement, Trotter's Independent Traders, now under new management. Managing Director, Rodney Trotter. Rodney took to the role with a terrifying level of seriousness. He started wearing a tie at breakfast. He spoke about executive stress and logistical paradigms. He even tried to listen to Mozart to unwind. Mozart's Symphony No. 38 in D major. Rodney explained to Trigger one evening in the flat. I find it helps me ease my executive stress. Trigger nodded slowly. Ain't there no words to this, Dave? No, Trigger, it's instrumental. Dell watched his brother with a mix of pride and annoyance. He was back in the game, even if he was technically just the staff. But the debt to the taxman still loomed. They needed a big score. They needed a miracle. And then the phone rang. Chapter 6, The Gold Rush. The studio lights were blinding. Jonathan Ross, a man who seemed to be made of charisma and expensive hair products, smiled at the camera. "Welcome to Gold Rush," he announced, "the fastest game show on TV. This is the show where you can win anything from £1 to 100,000 pounds." In the contestant's seat sat Derek Trotter. He had lied about his hobbies, claiming to love 16th century Italian Renaissance art instead of seeing what fell off the back of a lorry, and he had navigated the early rounds with the cunning of a street fox. He reached the final stages. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knockoff Swiss Army knife. For 50,000 pounds, Jonathan Ross said, leaning in, "Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo?" Dell felt the sweat prickling under his shimmery suit. He knew this, or he thought he knew it, but his brain was a jumble of French phrases and Peckham market prices. "I'm going to have to use me old SOS, aren't I?" Dell said, his voice trembling. "I'll call my brother, Rodney." Back at the flat, Rodney and Cassandra were dressed in their fantasy therapy outfits, Rodney as a gladiator and Cassandra as a police officer. It was supposed to be a quiet night of memory baggage unloading. The phone screamed. "Hello," Rodney snapped, assuming it was their annoying neighbor, Mickey Pierce. "Piss off, Mickey. You're getting on my tits now." "Rodney, it's Jonathan Ross." The silence that followed was deafening. Rodney realized he had just told one of the most famous men in Britain to piss off. "Rodney, we need your help," Jonathan said, hurried. "Derek is on 25,000. Going for 50. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo?" Rodney didn't hesitate. He had to GCEs. He had been listening to Mozart for a week. He was an executive. "Ravel," Rodney said with absolute certainty. 100%. "Dell, it's Ravel." Dell turned back to the camera, his chest puffed out. "I'll go with that. Jonathan, it's Ravel." Jonathan Ross looked at him with a face full of pity. "Derek, that was the wrong answer. It was Rodrigo." The world seemed to stop spinning. Dell's face went through every shade of red known to man. He had lost it all. Again. On national television. Chapter 7, The Phoenix of Peckham. The silence in the flat that night was heavy. Dell sat on the sofa, still wearing his game show suit, staring at the floor. Raquel was in the kitchen, and Rodney was hiding in his room, probably trying to find a way to dismantle his gladiator armor without making a sound. The phone rang. "If that's Mickey Pierce," Dell growled, picking it up, "I'm going to murder him." "Hello, is this Derek Trotter?" A voice asked. It sounded professional. "This is the producer of Gold Rush." Dell rolled his eyes. Oh, give it a rest, Mickey. I can hear the jukebox in the Nag's Head from here. No, Mr. Trotter, this is serious. We've made a mistake. Our researchers checked the facts. Ravel did write the music for the child and the enchantment. Even though he's a composer and not primarily a guitarist, the question was flawed. Dell sat up straight. A mistake? You mean? I was right? You were right. We're offering you the 50,000 pounds. Or the chance to come back and play for the 100,000. Dell looked at the room. He looked at Rodney, who had peeked his head out of the bedroom door. He looked at Raquel, who was standing in the doorway with hope in her eyes. Give all the money to charity, Dell shouted into the phone, his old bravado returning in a rush of adrenaline. And if you phone here once again, I'm going to come down there and kick your arse into shredded duck. Goodbye. He slammed the phone down. Dell, Rodney screamed. What are you doing? That was 50 grand. Dell started to laugh. A deep, wheezing Peckham laugh. It was Mickey Pierce, Rodney. I could hear the jukebox. He thought he could wind me up, but nobody winds up Derek Trotter. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. We're the Trotters, Rodney. We don't need charity. We're back in business. New management, new ideas. This time next year. Rodney sighed, but he couldn't help but smile. We'll be millionaires? No, Dell said, throwing an arm around his brother's shoulder. This time next year, we'll be debt free. And that, Rodney, is bonjour. It's bonjour, Dell, Rodney corrected. Exactly what I said. Prove exactly what I said. The neon sign of the Nag's Head flickered in the distance, a beacon of hope in the heart of Peckham. The Trotters were down, but they were never out. Because as long as there was a deal to be made and a brother to blame, the dream would never die. Chapter 8. The Cold Light of Day. The following morning did not bring the clarity Del Boy had hoped for. Instead, it brought a pounding headache and the lingering suspicion that he might have made a catastrophic tactical error. He sat at the formica table in the kitchen, nursing a mug of tea that was mostly sugar. Rodney stumbled in, looking disheveled. Del, Rodney said, his voice flat. I've been thinking about that phone call last night. Forget it, Rodney. Dell snapped. Mickey Pierce, professional wind-up merchant, probably recorded the whole thing to play at the pub later. Low D toilet. Rodney. Water under the bridge. Del, I went to the pub this morning to get some milk because the fridge is on the blink again. And Mickey Pierce was there. He looked as miserable as a rainy Tuesday in Margate. Apparently, his latest business venture selling laser-cut toast just failed. He didn't even have enough credit on his phone to make a prank call. Del froze, his mug halfway to his lips. What? And there's more. Sid showed me the morning paper. There's a small headline on page 12. Game show blunder. BBC apologizes to Peckham contestant over classical music gaffe. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. You could hear the distant rumble of the 171 bus and the slow, rhythmic dripping of the leaky tap. So, Del whispered, his voice barely audible. It wasn't Nicky. It was the producer, Del. You told the BBC to give £50,000 to charity in the name of the Trotters. Del Boy put his mug down. He stared at the wall, at the framed picture of their mother. Well, he said, his voice suddenly bright and brittle. At least we'll get a plaque or a mention in the newsletter. It's tax deductible, ain't it? We don't pay tax, Del. We're bankrupt, Rodney shouted. Details, Rodney, details. Del stood up, pacing the small kitchen. This is just a temporary setback. A minor hiccup in the grand tapestry of Trotter fortunes. We're under new management. Remember, Managing Director Rodney Trotter. What's our first move, boss? Rodney looked at the pile of unpaid bills on the counter. Our first move is to find something to sell. Something that doesn't involve the Sultan of Brunei or the BBC. Chapter 9, The Electronic Revolution. Rodney's first official act as managing director was to meet with Monkey Harris. Monkey was a man who lived up to his name short, agile, and always looking for a way to climb a bit higher on the social ladder. He met Rodney in the back of a van parked behind the Nag's Head. I've got a consignment. Rodney, Monkey whispered, opening a cardboard box. Electronic personal organizers. Top of the range. They tell the time, store 500 names, and have a built-in calculator. They're selling like crazy in the West End. Rodney picked one up. It was a sleek, black plastic device that looked like something from a low-budget sci-fi movie. How much? For you. A tenner apiece. I've got 200 of them. Rodney calculated. 200 at £10 was 2,000. If they sold them for 30, that was for £1,000 profit. It wasn't 50,000, but it was a start. I'll take them, Rodney said, trying to sound executive. But I'll need to pay in installments. Cash flow. You understand? Monkey nodded. I understand. Cash flow is the soul of business. I'll drop them off at Nelson Mandela House tonight. When Rodney returned to the flat, he found Del Boy trying to fix the washing machine with a bent coat hanger. Good news, Del. I've secured our first inventory. Electronic personal organizers. The future of business. We're going to modernize Peckham. One address book at a time. Del looked at the device. Electronic organizers. People round here can barely organize a trip to the toilet. Rodney, who's going to buy these? Everyone. Busy professionals, students, anyone who needs to stay on top of their game. It's executive stress management. Del, der chic. HMM, Del said, his eyes narrowing. They look a bit plastic. Are they waterproof? Why would they need to be waterproof? In case it rains on the market stall. Rodney, think of Voyager Pois. Chapter 10. Iconoclastic Autosuggestion. While the business world was being revolutionized by plastic organizers, the domestic world of the Trotters was entering the realm of fantasy therapy. Cassandra had insisted, after the stress of the bankruptcy and the game show disaster, she felt their relationship needed a reboot. She had found a book by an American psychologist who spoke of memory baggage and the need to create our own make-believe world. Iconoclastic autosuggestion. Rodney explained to Del Boy while they were sorting the organizers. It's about rejecting reality and becoming different people, just for an evening. Sounds like what I've been doing for 40 years. Rodney, Del quipped. What's the catch? We write down our fantasy figures, and then we become them. No dressing up. It's all in the mind. But as with everything in the Trotter household, the no dressing up rule was the first to go. Thursday night arrived. Del had agreed to take Raquel and Damien out to see a film, giving Rodney and Cassandra the flat to themselves. Or so Rodney thought. I'm taking them to see that new cartoon, Del said, adjusting his coat. The one about the singing fish. We'll be back late. Enjoy your autosuggestion. Rodney waited until the door closed. He went to his bedroom and emerged 10 minutes later wearing a leather skirt, a plastic chest plate, and sandals. He looked like he had been rejected from a high school production of Spartacus. Cassandra emerged from the bathroom. She was wearing a police uniform, complete with a hat and a plastic truncheon. Rodney, she gasped. I thought we said no dressing up. I couldn't help it. Cass, the book said to fully immerse yourself. I'm Russell Crowe in Gladiator. And I'm a detective from the Bill. Cassandra sighed. You look different. Strength and honor, Cassandra, Rodney said, striking a pose that nearly caused his chest plate to pop off. Now, let us unload our baggage. They sat on the sofa, trying to be reborn. But the atmosphere was somewhat dampened by the smell of Dill's lingering cigar smoke and the faint sound of the neighbor's heavy metal music. So, Rodney began, trying to deepen his voice. On my signal, unleash the feelings. Rodney, I don't feel like a detective. I feel like an idiot. That's just the memory baggage talking. Rejected. You are an officer of the law. I am a hero of Rome. Suddenly, the front door burst open. We're back, Del Boy shouted, stumbling in with Raquel and Damien. The cinema was full. Apparently, every kid in Peckham wants to see a singing fish. He stopped dead. He looked at Rodney. He looked at Cassandra. Oh, my God, Del whispered, his eyes widening. Rodney, what have you done to her? Is she arresting you? It's therapy. Del, Rodney hissed, trying to hide behind a cushion. Go away. Therapy, you look like you're about to fight a lion in a police station. Dell started to laugh. A deep, wheezing sound. Raquel, come and see this. Russell Crowe and the Bill are having a meeting in our front room. The fantasy was officially over. Reality hadn't just returned, it had kicked the door down and started laughing at them. Chapter 11, The Sultan's Shadow. A few days later, the executive stress was reaching a fever pitch. Marketers in Peckham were apparently resistant to digital organization. Rodney was sitting at the kitchen table, Mozart playing softly in the background, when the phone rang. Trotter's Independent Traders, Managing Director Rodney Trotter speaking, he said, trying to sound bored and important. Good evening, a voice said with a thick, exotic accent. I am wishing to speak with Managing Director. Rodney's eyes narrowed. This is he. Who is calling? My name is Asif Hazen. I am representative of Sultan of Brunei. Rodney rolled his eyes. He looked at Delboy, who was pretending to read the paper but was clearly listening. The Sultan of Brunei, Rodney repeated loudly. Well, how can I be of assistance, sir? His Highness has seen your advertisement in the newspaper. He is very impressed with your party planning and consultancy. Is he now? Rodney smirked. And what does His Highness want? Does he want me to fly out and organize a palace warming? Exactly. He wants you to fly to Brunei. All expenses paid. He has bought a crappy old three-wheeled van and he wants to know where to start it on cold mornings. Rodney's smirk vanished. He slammed the phone down. Shove it, Mickey, he yelled at the dead line. Just shove it. What happened? Dell asked, looking up. Dave's just had a big row with the Sultan of Brunei. It was Mickey Pierce. Dell, I could hear the jukebox. He thinks he's so clever, using an accent. But as Rodney sat back down, his Mozart symphony reached a crescendo. He looked at the advertisement he had placed. He had listed consultancy and party planning. It was a professional advert. He looked at the phone. For a fleeting second, he wondered, what if the Sultan of Brunei really did have an old van? What if he really did need a consultant from Peckham? Dell, Rodney whispered, do you think? Don't worry, Rodney, Dell said, patting him on the shoulder. The world's full of surprises. Look at Nicky Pierce, he's only just learned to read. They sat in the quiet flat to brothers bound by blood, bankruptcy, and a never-ending cycle of nearly and almost. They were back where they started, in Nelson Mandela House, with a mountain of debt and a box of plastic organizers. But as the neon sign of the Nags had flickered outside, Del Boy looked at his brother. This time next year, Rodney, he said, the old spark returning to his eyes. This time next year, we'll have sold all them organizers. We'll be back on top. Mange tout, Rodney, mange tout. And in the heart of Peckham, that was enough. Chapter 12, The Ghost of Mickey Pierce. The weight of the charity call hung over the flat like a thick London fog that refused to lift. Del Boy tried to carry himself with his usual swagger, but every time he passed a television, he felt a phantom pain in his wallet. 50,000 pounds gone with a single, ego-driven outburst. I could have bought a new van. Rodney, Del whispered, staring into his lukewarm tea. A yellow one, with leather seats, and a heater that actually works. You gave it away, Del, Rodney said, not looking up from his latest business management book. You wanted to look like a big man. Well, congratulations. You're the biggest man in the soup kitchen. Rodney was trying to embrace his role as managing director, but the reality of the market stall was far from the corporate boardrooms he envisioned. The electronic organizers were currently sitting in the hallway, taking up space and gathering dust. We need a marketing strategy, Del, Rodney announced, standing up. We can't just stand on a street corner and shout. We need to target the high-end demographic of Peckham. Del snorted. The high-end demographic of Peckham is anyone who's still got all their own teeth. Rodney, just get M down to the market. I'll do the patter. No, I'm the MD. I'll do the patter. You can be the logistics coordinator. The what? Rodney, I've been selling since you were in nappies. I could sell a no-entry sign to a getaway driver. But Rodney was insistent. He wanted to prove he was more than just a bone marrow donor in a cheap suit. He spent the evening practicing his executive voice, much to Raquel's amusement and Dul's irritation. The next morning, the market was bustling. Rodney stood behind the stall, looking stiff and uncomfortable in a trench coat he thought looked professional. Del stood to the side, arms folded, waiting for the inevitable. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, Rodney shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Experience the future of personal management. The Trotter 3000 electronic organizer. Stores 500 names. Calculates. Tells the time in Tokyo. A woman in a headscarf stopped and looked at the black plastic device. Does it tell me when the 171 bus is coming? Well, no, Rodney stammered. But it can store the bus timetable if you type it in. I can't type, she said, moving on. And I don't know anyone in Tokyo. Del Boy stepped forward, unable to restrain himself any longer. Boy, darling, come back. Don't listen to him. He's just the apprentice. Look at this, it's not just an organizer. It's a status symbol. It shows the world you're a person of substance. And look at doubles as a very stylish paperweight for your betting slips. He grabbed one and held it high. Normally 30 quid, but today, because my brother here has just been released from a psychiatric institute, and I'm feeling sorry for him, 15 quid, for 25. Within 10 minutes, Del had sold 3. Rodney watched in a mixture of awe and resentment. The executive dream was slipping away, replaced by the familiar grit of the Peckham hustle. Chapter 13, The Road Sweepers Union. As the weeks dragged on, the organizers sold in drips and drabs. But the mountain of debt to the inland revenue remained immovable. The threat of bailiffs was no longer a distant worry. It was a looming shadow that darkened every conversation. Raquel's right, Dell, Rodney said one evening, looking defeated. Trigger said they're recruiting down at the depot. Road sweeping. The pay is steady. Del Boy looked like he had been slapped. Road sweeping. Me, Derek Trotter, the man who once had peacocks on his lawn. I'm a trader, Rodney, an entrepreneur. You're a bankrupt entrepreneur. Del, we need money. Real money. Not this time next year money. Del looked around the flat. He saw the peeling wallpaper, the half-empty bottles, and the tired look in Raquel's eyes. The bravado he had worn like armor for decades was finally starting to rust. I'll help you fill in the form, Rodney offered, his voice softening. Me? Del shouted. I wasn't talking about me. You're the one who needs a job. You're young. You're fit. You can push a broom from here to Lewisham. I'm the managing director. Rodney protested. Exactly. And part of managing a company is diversifying your income streams. Now, go on, get the pen and see if they've got any vacancies for a logistics consultant with his own high-vis vest. The tension in the flat was broken by a knock at the door. It was Trigger. All right, Dave, Trigger said, nodding to Rodney. It's Rodney, Trigger. Yeah, whatever. Del, I heard you were looking for a bit of work. My supervisor says he's got a spot on the night shift. It's mostly quiet. Just you and the broom. Gives you plenty of time to hear the voices. Del Boy closed his eyes. The image of himself in an orange vest, sweeping up kebab wrappers at 3 a.m., was the final indignity. Thanks, Trig, Del said, his voice surprisingly quiet. I'll think about it. After Trigger left, Del sat by the window, looking out at the estate. He thought about the watch, the millions, the Barbados sun. It all felt like a dream someone else had dreamt. Rodney, Del said, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Did I really tell them to give that 50 grand to charity? You did. Del, you were brilliant. The whole country thinks you're a saint. Del smiled, a small, sad flick of the lips. A saint with no shoes, eh? Well, at least I'm a saint. Say lavi, Rodney. Say lavi. Chapter 14, The Final Word. The interview with Justin was drawing to a close. The high-end office felt even more alien now that the story had been told. The mahogany desk seemed colder, the air purifiers more sterile. Justin adjusted his glasses, scribbling a final note in his leather-bound notebook. It's a fascinating journey, Mr. Trotter, from the heights of sudden wealth to the current situation. But tell me, do you regret it? the watch, the investment, the charity call. Del Boy leaned forward. The gold on his fingers caught the light. He looked at Rodney, then back at Justin. Regret it, Del said, his voice regaining its familiar resonance. Justin, my son, life is like a market stall. Sometimes you're selling silk, and sometimes you're selling scrap. But the point is, you're always in the game. Rodney shifted in his seat, looking at his brother with a mix of exasperation and pride. We had the world in our hands for a minute, Del continued. And yeah, we dropped it, but we're trotters. We're like those little rubber balls you get in the 50p machines. The harder you hit us against the pavement, the higher we bounce. He stood up, smoothing his shimmering suit. I've got a warehouse full of electronic organizers that are going to revolutionize the world of personal management. I've got a managing director who's got more ideas than a patent office. And I've got a family that, well, they're the only thing that's actually worth $6.5 million. Justin stood up, offering his hand. Thank you, Derek. It's been an insight. I'll be in touch. As they walked out of the office and into the cool London air, Rodney turned to Del. So, what now, MD? Del Boy looked at the yellow Capri parked at the curb. It was old, it was battered, but it was theirs. Now, Rodney, Del said, his eyes sparkling with a new scheme. Now we go to the Nag's Head. I think I know a bloke who's looking for 200 slightly water-damaged electronic organizers. He's a Lap's laptop salesman. And I think he's a fan of Ravel. Rodney sighed, shaking his head. You never learn, do you? Learn? Rodney, my boy, if I learned, I'd be bored. Mange tout, Rodney, mange tout. And as they drove off into the Peckham sunset, the neon sign of the Nag's Head flickered to life, welcoming them back to the only world they truly understood. Chapter 15, The Nag's Head Debrief. The Nag's Head was exactly as they had left it, dimly lit, smelling of stale lager and failed dreams, and populated by the usual suspects. Sid was behind the bar, looking as if he'd personally invented misery, while Trigger sat in his usual corner, nursing a half-pint of something that looked like swamp water. Del Boy burst through the doors, his shimmering suit reflecting the flickering neon lights. Behind him, Rodney followed, looking like a man who had just survived a high-stakes interrogation which, in a way, he had. A round for my friends, Sid, Del shouted, slapping a 5-pound note onto the counter. And make 'em large ones. We've just been to the top of the mountain and come back with the view. Sid didn't look up from his glass polishing. The mountain, last I heard, you were at the bottom of a bankruptcy hole. Del, that 5-pound note wouldn't even buy you a ticket out of Peckham. Details, Sid, details. Del laughed, grabbing to brandies. He walked over to Trigger. All right. Trig, you missed it. We just had a meeting with a high-flying biographer. He wanted the inside scoop on the Trotter Empire. Trigger nodded slowly, his eyes vacant. Did he ask about the voices? Del? No. Trig, he didn't. But he was very impressed with our raison d'etre. Your what? Our reason for being, Trig, Rodney intervened, sitting down. Not that Del actually knows what it means. I know exactly what it means, Rodney. Del snapped. It means we're still here, ain't we? Against all the odds. The taxman, the game shows, the Sultan of Brunei, they've all tried to knock us down. But we're like a pair of bad pennies. Boyke walked into the pub then, looking as smug as a man who had just sold a rusty tractor for the price of a Ferrari. Ah, the Trotter brothers, back from the financial wilderness. I see. I hear you've been disqualified from running companies. Derek, a bit of a choker, that. Not disqualified, Boyke, Del said, leaning back. Under new management, meet the managing director of Trotter's Independent Traders, Rodney Trotter, esque. Boyke let out a dry, rattling laugh. Rodney, running a company, I've seen more business acumen in a damp sponge. What's the first item on the agenda? Rodney, a national shortage of lanky idiots? Rodney went red. Actually, Boyke, we've just secured a major consignment of high-end electronic personal organizers. We're modernizing the Peckham retail sector. Electronic organizers. Boyke sneered. My dog has better organization than anyone in this pub. Who's going to buy them? People with ambition. Boyke, Del said, his eyes narrowing. People like you. Tell you what, since we're old mates, I'll let you have a dozen for a special insider price. Think of the prestige. I'll think of the bankruptcy court. Derek, Boyke said, turning away. Enjoy your empire. Chapter 16, The Executive Lunch. Monday morning arrived with the relentless grayness of a Peckham winter. Rodney, now fully committed to his role as managing director, decided it was time to establish a new corporate culture. This involved an executive lunch with Cassandra at the local Italian restaurant, though his expense account was currently a handful of loose change and a half-punched loyalty card for the kebab.